pleasure to meet y'all at last. Yeah, definitely a pleasure. Well, you know what? I not only feel very happy about what had just happened, and I will go ahead to explain that in a little bit, but you know what? It's time for another bonus for films I should have talked about years ago. And don't worry, I will have another original episode queued later for today, but here on August 18th, 2021, it's time that I talk a little bit about the sequel to Suicide Squad, because a little while ago I've talked about the first Suicide Squad film from 2016, and well, since then, let's just say, it got a bit of an early release on HBO Max. It came out 12 days ago, August 6, 2021, a bit earlier than we originally anticipated. And since then, I was actually able to watch it. It's still fresh in my mind, apparently. I was absolutely excited that now I get the chance to talk about the Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad 2, actually. I'm never calling it by the same title. That's probably one of a few things that this film actually could have had a lot of improvements on. I mean, honestly, this really did need some work before it would eventually become probably one of the all-time greatest masterpieces I've ever had the chance to talk about. And I don't know about you, but I'm actually going to go as far as to pretty much giving it one of the highest scores that I've ever had to do so far. But we're going to be waiting for a little bit, because I do have to talk about the film itself and all that good stuff, and why am I so captivated by all of it. First of all, the film's premise is that it does in fact take place quite a while after most of the events of the other DCEU entries so far. It basically takes place with a bunch of DC rejects, as some film critics and some fans would put it, with a lot more obscured heroes and villains and the like. There was a villain out there called Savant, who was played by Michael Rooker, whom you'd probably remember from Call of Duty Black Ops 2, the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, or even in that little cameo appearance at the end of Brightburn from 2019. But here in this particular film, not even 10 years after Rooker's interpretation of the character Mike Harper from Black Ops 2, not even 10 years. I mean, that's pretty long, actually. Time sure does fly, but anyways, Rooker's performance as Savant basically goes from basically being a prisoner who flips a ball all around a prison cell to basically being appointed and tasked with a very special mission. But unfortunately, with the large grouping that Savant is paired with, including a rather creepy weasel, oh man, I sure have had a lot of reactions from all that. I mean, lots of reactions where people were absolutely disgusted and fumed with the weasel on the screen, but you know what? It's hilarious. The weasel, at least in this film, is absolutely hilarious by any means. It's like Penn and Teller hilarious, in a way. Every time I see the weasel, I can't help but make a slight giggle at the way that it jitters around and makes these little sounds. Like, that is hilarious. I mean, I cannot believe people were disgusted by it. Oh, man. But I guess it's even more interesting to note the fact that, well, guess what? Savant ends up dying less than 10 minutes after the film started. So Michael Rooker is right away out of the cast, out of the plot itself. But that's okay, because you know what? We get a lot of other characters that we remember. If you remember Margot Robbie from, well, many other DCEU entries, including the first Suicide Squad, and at the time the most recent entry where Robbie's performance as Harley Quinn was put together in Birds of Prey. I've already talked a bit about that film, and it was a great movie nonetheless. Quite an amazing pick for the year 2020. But here, 18 months later, of course we get the same old Robbie we know and love, the same old psychopathic killer who was once a worker, a psychologist from, wow, good old faces of Blackgate Prison. But looking at the character Harley Quinn nowadays, we really are seeing a whole lot of improvements. Character development has pretty much gone way through the roof of a 50-story tall building. I'm dead serious. Harley Quinn has probably one of the greatest things we've ever come to imagine in the faces of comedy, in the basis of action, and the dialogue is just undeniably amazing. Like, Robbie, how come you haven't won an Oscar for this? How have you not won any Oscars at all? Like, I will never understand the world as it is right now because Robbie's performance is undeniably great. Way too great to ignore. Like, seriously. If it weren't for Robbie's performance, then that would be one of a few things that would have made this film not at all as good as it really is. That's kind of ironic, though. The fact that I'm calling this film quite possibly one of the most amazing masterpieces in recent years, to know that this came out in the worst year of all time, I never quite expected something like this to actually happen. But yet it is. It's happening and it's real. It's still running on HBO Max right now. But yet, I still have a lot more to talk about this film, so you might want to go ahead and buckle down and get yourself ready for a lot that's coming out of my mouth. Of course, the majority of other characters and cast members include Bloodsport, who was played by Idris Elba, Peacemaker, who was played by former WWE superstar John Cena, and then of course you have the good old Rocky Balboa / John Rambo, Sylvester Stallone, playing the character King Shark. And on top of all that, you got plenty of other characters here and there. You got Polka Dot Man, whom is quite possibly one of the strangest kinds of DC characters I ever had the irony to even mention. A guy who could fling polka dots that actually kill people on contact and destroy anything they touch. As weird, absurd, and crazy of an idea as that actually sounds, I never knew that they could be so effective at taking out things. But next thing you know, maybe someone will come along with a bunch of triangles or a bunch of squares or a bunch of diamonds or a bunch of anything, and they could be even worse. But you know what though? The performances that were done by David Melashian, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but anyways, the performances were just beyond ecstatically beautiful. I could never make this stuff up if I tried. The actor really turned the character into one of the most absurd pieces of culture possible and perfected it. Way better than any of us could have ever expected. I guess what makes it even better, the way I see it, is the fact that the one enemy in the Polka Dot Man's life is a freaking parent. Like, again, this is as absurd of an idea as it possibly is, but because of the amazing comedic nature of the DCEU nowadays, because of the fact that they've gone from being a pretty bad laughingstock to one of the greatest recurring franchises in history, alongside the MCU and the Transformers Bayverse and all that good stuff. Again, it's unbelievably absurd, crazy, obscured ideas like this that turn these films into hit masterpieces that gross billions of dollars. But then again, because the film hasn't even been out for that long, it still does need quite a way to basically beat its budget. Last time I checked, it barely had $110 million, and its budget was at least $70 million above that. So it still needs some more time before it would eventually gross more than its budget, and eventually we will be able to see a whole lot more develop from this film itself. But I still do love many of the other characters' performances. Bloodsport is that serious guy. Peacemaker is that, well, liberal, much like myself, who wants to do anything to basically free the country. And then of course you have King Shark. I tell you, if anybody could do it, it's Stallone. No one could be better at that, at least from what I can gather. Man, just to know that a lot of these actors have come back, Idris Elba, John Cena, Sylvester Stallone, it's like we're really seeing a lot of different mashups come together at the same time. Performances by each of these actors alone were some of the best that we could have seen on screen, with John Cena being a former superstar of WWE, which was back then called WWF. Then we have Idris Elba, who of course hit it very big with Fast and Furious's Hobbs and Shaw, alongside several other projects here and there. And on top of all that, you got Sylvester Stallone, whom was already very much remembered for Cliffhanger, Rambo, and Rocky. I tell you, how could it get any better than this? Seeing long careers from each of these actors is already enough to quite possibly make such a little film become a high-selling masterpiece like this. But still, Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn might as well just be considered the greatest sort of role ever made in American cinema, and maybe even in history. I mean, sure, you could argue with Orson Welles in Citizen Kane, or maybe with, well, Fay Wray from King Kong, or maybe anything else, but again, these newer films are starting to show that you can really go big, way bigger than ever, and gross even bigger than usual. And you also could even argue Avengers Endgame being the greatest film of all time. But still, there's a lot of reasons to not like it just as much as you did back then. But however, with this, I seriously doubt that I will be able to distance myself from something like this. Despite the fact that it's rated R, there are so many people watching it right now. Way too many. Alongside the fact that you have amazing actors who each deliver their own sort of personality to the screen for all of us to be entertained all at once. I tell you, there were way too many moments out there that were way too hilarious, that I could never get enough of it. The first time I watched it, I immediately loved it. From the first moment of the entire film, all the way to the very end, I never could imagine something like this would finally ever happen. I am beyond happy right now. Like, this is the one thing that is probably going to help me get through the rest of this entire awful flipping year. The worst year of all time somehow delivers quite possibly the biggest masterpiece in history. So, suck it, Avengers Endgame. Because DCEU has given us quite possibly the greatest mashup we've ever seen in history. I couldn't make this stuff up even if I even tried. Ah, man. Like, that is really saying a lot. Of course, we all know there's a polar opposite to this. The greatest thing to ever possibly be unveiled in American cinema. And then, of course, there was the worst ever piece of all time, which is certainly not Ghostbusters Answer the Call, which I've also talked about here in films I should have talked about years ago. I'd most likely just call it the worst ever excuse for a reboot. The worst ever possible remake to ever happen in history. Much worse than the 2006 Pink Panther along with its sequel and the 1998 Psycho. And then, of course, there were loads of other horrible remakes out there that never should have been made to tarnish these franchises. But you know what, though? Suicide Squad 2, released in August 2021, is really the big masterpiece that we never saw coming. I have to mention the ending, though. All the heroes go as far as to defeat a giant starfish. Basically, the Conqueror, as it's called, ends up becoming the main antagonist. A gigantic kaiju-like starfish creature that spawns little starfish that are able to basically latch onto people, much like the facehuggers from Alien. Actually, it's pretty much the exact same, but instead of planting eggs inside the host and then killing it, the starfish, the little ones at least, they basically take over people's minds. And at the same time, they allow the host to communicate like normal. just to basically translate what the giant starfish is basically trying to say. So you know what? That's also something I could be on board with on a daily basis. In a way, you can basically consider this giant starfish to quite possibly one of the quirkiest, weirdest, strangest, most eccentric types of villains that could have ever possibly been put together in a superhero film. But you know what? A giant starfish as the main enemy to look out for, I've honestly seen worse, if you want to call it that. So it's honestly one of the strangest kinds of villains that you could possibly expect to be for a main antagonist in an entire production. It's still an amazing thing though. The fact that these heroes come together to save the day and go at it to fight a giant starfish with, well, guess what? Harley Quinn basically defeats it, utilizing a javelin, going right into the starfish's eye, allowing it to bleed from the inside out, combined with the Ratcatcher's extremely gigantic army of rats, to go all over the starfish and basically eat it alive, from the inside out as well as outside in. Again, that is much more than just climatic. It shows that these heroes have come together and saved the day. It also shows that Ratcatcher can truly be useful for a hero or otherwise. It also shows that Idris Elba's performance as Bloodsport can truly be way bigger than we've ever imagined. After all, it's not like Bloodsport is that typical no-nonsense law enforcement officer that we've seen from a lot of those weird cliché police officer movies. Like RoboCop or, well, Beverly Hills Cop even. But the bottom line here that I might as well go as far to proclaim is that this film truly is much more than just any masterpiece that we've ever had the chance to talk about in any way. I'm more than happy to say that I'm giving it as high of a score as I possibly could, but you never know. Maybe there might even be something even better in the future. From what I've gathered though so far, 9.5 out of 10. So you know what? One of the greatest masterpieces I've ever had the chance to talk about here in films I should have talked about years ago is right here as a bonus episode. And I am happy to say that now that I've talked about it, hopefully maybe you can lay down your thoughts on it, point of view, or better yet, your facts about the whole entire thing. Either it's a good movie, or even better, it is a fantastic, excellent movie. I went as far as to call it that for so many reasons. So, from beginning to end, it is full of action-packed fun. It never was boring. The comedy, humor, and little horror and blood and gore have really kept me alive and on edge, knowing that I would really want to look back at this film, knowing how somehow it turned out to be the greatest piece of the DCEU so far, as it is, and also one of the greatest things to ever happen in modern day American cinema, and maybe even for all time. So, bottom line, it is that good. Give it a watch on HBO Max right now and look back at this video and you'll see how I feel this way. But, you know what? Maybe I should probably get back to work on some of my other things around here and also get back to work on regular films I should have talked about years ago episodes. So if you want to see more, go down to my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.